Hi, today we are going to talk about valuation of shares. We also call it valuation of stock, but we are not talking about inventory. We are talking about shares. In other words, how to calculate the market value of share. Ladies and gentlemen, this topic is very important for CMA Part 2, ACC F9 and other professional qualifications. We need to know why it is important to calculate the value of share. Obviously, if you're going to buy a share of a company, if you're going to invest in a company, you need to know how much you should be paying for each share. So that is the market value, that is the fair value, intrinsic value or present value of a share. Generally, we use P naught for it, P with a 0. So in today's session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to discuss the various methods by which we can calculate the market value of a share. So the very first one is we are talking about calculating value of shares through dividend growth model. One thing you need to remember is why shares have a value. One of the prime reason is when you buy a share, you become owner of the company to that extent. The second reason is companies pay dividends. Most of the companies pay dividend when you buy share. That is your share of profit because you're investing and you're getting a return in the form of dividend. Third reason is that over the period of time, the share price may increase. Let's say you purchase a share for $10 and after maybe a year or two, it is for $12. So we call it capital gain. In this video, we are going to focus on dividends. How to value shares looking at the dividends of the share. So the very first question I'm going to do here is that we are assuming that the shares pay constant dividend every year. So if a company pays same dividend every year, forever, because companies have unlimited life, so it is more like the concept of perpetuity. And what is a perpetuity? A perpetuity is a fixed amount, whether paid or received, forever. So here in this question, I've given some details. Par value of a preferred stock is $40. Dividend paid is 5% every year forever. Investors' required rate of return is 10%. In that case, what will be the present value of the share? So please note, if the dividends are same every year, it is just like a perpetuity. We use the formula like this. Present value of the share or market value of the share is equal to the amount of dividend divided by investors' required rate of return. So dividend is 5% of this, which will be $2. Investors' required rate of return is 10%, which is 0.1. You can write 0.1 even, no issues. Better to write 0.1. So in this case, the share will have a fair value or present value. You can call it market value or simply P naught of $20. I hope this is pretty straightforward. So I use the same formula. If you go back to my previous videos on capital budgeting, there I have discussed how to calculate present value of a perpetuity. Perpetuity is a fixed amount paid or received forever. So we are getting $2 forever. So just divide the amount of dividends by the investor's required rate of return. You get the fair value or present value of shares. Now the next scenario is, what if the company's dividends are growing every year, which we call constant growth? So what we do is we use the dividend growth formula in order to calculate present value of the share. So if you look at this, dividend received last year was $10. Growth in dividend is 8% every year. Investors' required rate of return is 12%. So what is present value of shares? So in this scenario, when the dividend is constantly growing every year, we use this formula. Present value of share, which is P naught or fair value of share, is equal to D naught into 1 plus G whole thing divided by R minus G. Now here you need to understand D naught is the dividend paid last year, which is $10. 1 is in the formula. G is the growth rate, which is 8%, which is 0.08. R is the investor's required rate of return, which is 12%, which is 0.12. Minus growth rate is 8%, which is 0.08. So when you solve all this, you will get $270. So this is your present value of shares, fair value of shares. If you want to buy a share in a company where dividends are growing 8% every year, and last year the dividend which was paid by the company was $10, and this $10 dividend is growing 8% every year, and if the investor's required rate of return is 12%, how much you should be paying for this share? You should be paying $270. Another scenario is sometime we would like to invest in a company share. So we want to know how much should we pay for the share today. But we are also interested to know that if you're buying a share today for, let's say, $10, what will be its price after 3 or 4 or 5 years? So here we are talking about valuing shares at some future date. So first step is you need to know what is the value of share today. And then you can find the future value of the share. So finding the value of share today is the same like you use the formula P naught is equal to, and it's growing also. So annual dividend is $2. If you want, I can write the formula here. P naught is equal to DO into 1 plus G whole thing upon R minus G. So if I put this in the formula, this is $2 into 1 plus growth rate is 4%, so this is 0.04. Whole thing divided by R is investors required rate of return, which is 0.15, minus growth is 0.04. So when you solve all this, you will get 18.909. Now this 18.909 is the shares value today, the fair value today if you buy. And we are interested to know what will be the shares price in 5 years. So what you can do is this share value, you just multiply it by 1 plus R to the power n. So I don't have space here, I'm just writing here 18.909 into 1 plus R. R is the growth rate, which is 4%. So it will be 1.04. Power n is the number of years. After how many years? 5 years. So you multiply by 5. When you solve this, you will get $23. Which means if the last year dividend paid was $2, if the dividend is growing 4% every year, investors required rate of return is 15%. So how much you should be paying for the shares right now? You should be paying $18.9. And this share which you're buying today for $18.9, what will be the value and worth of the share in 5 years' time? In 5 years' time, it will be $23. Sometimes what happens, you are investing in a company for reason best known to you, but not for dividends. Or sometimes what happens that the dividends or the growth in dividend is not given at all. So what we can do is we can use EPS. If dividends are not given and you are supposed to calculate the fair value of shares, the market value shares or present value of shares, what to do? The only thing is we use the formula present value of share. Instead of dividend, we take earning per share. So if last earning is given to us, last year EPS, and if it is growing, so last year EPS into 1 plus G will give you E1, or you can take EPS of last year into 1 plus growth rate for EPS, not dividend. Whole thing divided by investors required rate of return minus the growth rate. So instead of growth rate of dividends, you can also look at the growth rate of EPS, which is very much there in the face of the financial statement as per requirement of IAS 33. So rest all is the same. You look at the EPS, last year EPS, multiply by growth 1 plus G, divide by investors required rate of return minus the growth rate in EPS, you will get the present value of the share. Our next discussion is sometimes it happens that you're going to invest in a company. Obviously, before investing in a company, you will look at their financials, the previous year financials, maybe last 5, 6, 7 years financials. So you found that for the last, if you pick up the data for last 10 years, first 5 years, the dividend grew at the rate of 8%. And after the 5th year, last 3 years, last 5 years, the dividend are growing by 3%. So what is happening here? There are two different types of growth in dividend. First 5 years at the rate of 8%, after that 3%. So we can still find the value of shares using two-step dividend growth model. Let's have a look at it. So now we have a scenario here. We are using the two-stage dividend growth model to calculate the value of shares. So if you look at the historical details, a company's dividend grew by 8% for the first 3 years and then at the rate of 5% onwards. Dividend paid this year is $2 and the investors' required rate of return is 15%. If you encounter a question like this, first of all, see if the current year dividend is $2 and it is growing at the rate of 8%, how much it will be for the following 2-3 years. So first year it is $2, as we know. You multiply $2 by, you increase it by 8%, which is multiplying by 1.08. You will get 2.16. This 2.16 you multiply by 1.08 to make it to increase it by 8%. This will become 2.33. Now what we are looking at is, we had dividend this year $2. It is growing by 8%. So $2, it already grew first year, second year 8%, third year 8%. So because these are future values of dividend, I want to know what is the present value of these dividends. So I'm going to use discount factor at the rate of 15%. So 1.15. This is year 1, 0.8695. Then it's going to be 0.7561 and 0.6575. So these are discount factors. It is available in the present value table. All you have to do is you have to look under 15% for year 1, 2 and 3. These are the discount factors. Just multiply them. You get the present value. Add all of them. You get the present value of the dividend, which has been growing for 3 years. What is the value today? Today means year 0. So let's find that. So 2 into 0.8695 gives me 1.739. Then 2.16 into 0.7561 gives me 1.633, and 2.33 into 0.6575 gives me 1.531. So if I add all of them, 1.739 plus 1.633 plus 1.531, it gives me 4.903. I've just taken 4 places to make it more accurate. 4.9589. So this is the first step, that the dividend which was growing at the rate of 8% for 3 years, this is how it grew for 3 years at 8%. It was last year it was something, it grew by 8%, it became 2, then 8% again, then 8% again. These are the future values for year 1, 2 and 3. We multiplied by the discount rate, we got the present value. So at year 0, I could say at year 0 means now the value of the share is this much. Now we are going to the next stage, because after 3 years the dividend is then growing at the rate of 5%. Earlier it kept growing at 8% for 3 years. After 3 years, 4 years onwards, it's growing at the rate of 5%. Now what we understand, the value of share now is 4.9. And the value of dividend at the end of year 3 is 2.33. And we know from here, it is growing at the rate of 5%. So what we can do is, we can take the dividend at year 3, which is 2.33. And we can multiply it by 1 plus g, which is the growth rate. So 1 plus g, this looks like this, 2.33 into 1 plus growth rate is 5%, which is 0.05. So this will look like 2.33 into 1.05 When we multiply, get 2.4465. Now what is happening? This becomes dividend for year 4. Because till year 3 it was 2.33, it grew by 5%, so in year 4 it will be this much. So we want to know from year 3 it grew to this much. So at year 3, what will be the value of share? If the dividend is this much in year 4, what will be the value of share at year 3? So we can calculate the price of shares. I'm writing 3 here means the price of share at year 3, not at year 0. Okay. So this will be D4 divided by R minus G. So price of share at year 3 is D4 is 2.4465, and you know investors required rate of return is 15%, which is 0.15. Growth rate now is 5%, which is 0.05. So if I solve all this, I get 24.465. This is the price of share at year 3. Now this is best explained if I make a timeline, especially for beginners to understand what I have done so far. Let's have a look at the timeline. Now if you look at this timeline, year 1, if you could see dividend, $2, 2.16, 2.33. Now these are the future values. If I bring them to year 0 means finding the present value. So if I bring it here to year 0, this also to year 0, this also to year 0, and these are the values. Okay, 2.33 is actually 1.539, and bring it here, this is 1.6331, and this is 1.739. So in all, the present value of all this is 4.95. So I got the value, present value of the dividends which were growing for the first 3 years at the rate of 8%. We also need to look at what happened to this dividend in year 4. It grew to 2.4465. 2.4465. It grew to 2.4465. And then we also found the present value of year 3. If the dividend is this much, what is the value here? So we found it, the share price at year 3, I am writing here P3, is 24.465. We should also understand this, that this is the price at year 3. We are talking about now because we are buying the share now. So this is the future value of the share after 3 years. We need to discount it back. We need to find the present value of this amount. So because this is year 3, our discount rate is 15%. So what you can do is just take 24.465 multiplied by the present value interest factor. Okay, and you take the rate 15% from the table, and this is 3 years, n will be 3. So 24.465, the present value interest factor, if you check in the table, you can calculate on the calculator. I've explained this in my video on capital budgeting. So when I look in the table for this, the value I get is 0.6575, and this is the same value if you could see here. See, at 15%, what is the discount rate for 3? This. Now when we multiply, we get the present value of share now, which is P0, 16.085. Now this is just the present value of this amount. What about the present value of all these dividends? This is 4.95. So you can add this 4.95 to this, and you will get finally the present value of shares which you have to pay today, the fair value of share. Okay, dividend which grew for 3 years at 8%, what is the present value? This much. Thereafter, dividend grew at a different rate. What is the present value now? This much. So when you add both these, so ladies and gentlemen, if you encounter a situation where you're trying to value the price of the share, you're trying to find the present value of the share, the market price or fair value of the share, you want to invest in a company, you need to know how much to pay, and the data given and analyzed so far shows you that the dividend of the share has been growing at two different rates. For the first 3 or 4 years at 8% per year, and thereafter at 5%, we have to use two-stage dividend growth model. First try to grow the dividend, find the present value, then this dividend at year 3 is growing at the rate of 5%. So I grew it by 5%. This is the value of dividend at year 4. So what is the value at year 3 in that case? So I found this the value, the price of the share at year 3 using the same formula. Remember, P naught is equal to D into 1 plus G upon R minus G. So because it was dividend at this, so I took div 4 divided by R minus G. So this gives me 24. This is the share price for the dividend which grew 4th year onwards. Share price, okay, at year 3. But I don't need year 3, I need at year 0. That's why I multiply this amount by the present value interest factor at 15% for year 3. So this gave me the price of this, because this was the share price at year 3. I wanted at year 0. At year 0 it is this much. And what is the value of the dividend which grew the first 3 years? 4.95. So when I add this, this is the present value of all the dividends which grew at 8%. And this is the share price after dividend growing 8%. So when I add all this, I get the share price as of today, and I should be paying $21. Anything you don't understand, please write it in the comment section. I will respond to you. If you like this video, please share it with your dear and near ones so that others can also benefit. Thank you so very much for your precious time.